Alright guys, so in this video I played The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt for the first time in 2023. This game has always been one I've wanted to play for as long as I started seriously playing through story games, as in a regular basis and not just the occasional one. So now I've delved into The Witcher 3, I'll be giving an overall review and my thoughts to let you know if it's worth playing in present day. The game is definitely loved by lots of people and is one of the most talked about open world RPG games, along with ones like Red Dead 2 and Skyrim, so I know the majority of people who have played it already know that it's worth going back to, and will always keep recommending it years on due to how iconic it is and how big it is. But I do want to give an in-depth talk about what's good and what to expect, so if you're ready then hit that like button down below, and if you enjoy these style of videos and story video game reviews then maybe even considering subscribing to the channel as well to check out the other uploads on various games I'll be putting out. Now let's jump into The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. The Witcher 3 is set in the continent, which is basically a fictional world that includes different dimensions, meaning that it's not just humans that you meet, but many different fantasy creatures, monsters, elves and animals are roaming the world. Therefore this already does provide a lot of flexibility for the player in terms of exploration and collecting many different quests and just the overall engagement. The world and setting is what makes the game so incredible. There isn't many open world games that really focus in on bringing the game setting alive really, in terms of what's included and the different characters you meet. Even in Skyrim, that was one of the first games of this genre, and the NPCs and characters can always provide something, and the player can always interact with every single one of them, even if it's just a small conversation. And now that was in 2012, so fast forward 4 years later and The Witcher 3's world is just overhauled with characters and animals always doing something different as you turn every corner. So many unique tasks that just change throughout the day, like they have their very own schedule for themselves. This was also improved on in Red Dead 2, and all three of these games are loved by many people. Overall yes, but a huge part of that is due to the world you play in and simply just travelling through the map. Without saying too much, the game does start off in White Orchard, which is the main town of Kaer Morhen. That intertwines different villages and farmlands, therefore the villagers are always hard at work, so it's always just so interesting just to watch them and talk to them as you pass through on your horse whilst exploring or travelling to your next quest. The interactions and just random encounters such as people asking for help or confronting you, it's completely overhauled and the exploration is endless, so you never get bored even after completing the game already, I'm sure. Many games don't do this for me, and it's safe to say this one is one that does, and it definitely is high up there. The locations do vary from the small and simple town or farm areas as mentioned, but as you progress further you explore many forests and ruins, mountains, castles, swamps, lakes and so many other areas, all just so unique and different from each other, down to the architecture of the buildings, not only the exterior and the various building designs with distinctive roof shapes and eccentric wall patterns, shops scattered throughout towns, but also just the interior of the buildings as well. You enter with all of them feeling so alive. None of the designs or layouts are ever repeated or becoming boring. You can just tell right away that they worked so hard and put so much time and effort into this medieval world that you play in that's historically accurate, as this is of course the building block and main structure of all open world RPG games. If you didn't know, the game's graphics have been completely upgraded as well in the next gen update that released back in December, which fully improves the graphics and visuals of the world, just immersing yourself even more into the beautiful landscapes and many different areas in terms of lighting and textures, which can always be increased or decreased in settings on PC. Not only that, but the character designs and faces are so much more realistic compared to the base game, where the detail really comes out in cutscenes, which I loved, and how many different camera angles and shots they've implemented. Even if it's just a face-to-face conversation, there's always a change in view to keep you engaged. Another major reason why this game is so critically acclaimed and highly rated is down to the game's story and narrative. The story definitely does work and connects incredibly well with the world you play in as you go through it, whereas in Skyrim, like in my last video, the overall narrative is not as much the main aspect for the entirety of the game. I'd say that Skyrim is a lot more independent in the way you progress through the game, and yes, a big part of this is because there isn't a main protagonist who gradually grows in their personality and changes as a person. Skyrim is all down to how you want to act as a character in the game, and you can always change the way you want to be seen as. In not only The Witcher 3 but many other games like Red Dead for example, the way you play as Geralt or Arthur Morgan, your choices can significantly impact the story progression and the game's narrative due to how other characters may view you, because it's very sensitive on the way you play, which I see as an amazing and interactive feature ran throughout the game that I personally believe significantly upgrades the game because of how much more engagement you get out of it. It becomes a lot more exciting for me as you always have to think when playing or talking to characters, even if it's just a small conversation, which brings a huge sense of responsibility, and the narrative can always be altered every time. This is why I always tend to mention in all my reviews, as it's a huge feature that makes people love the game. The main protagonist of Geralt of Rivia is of course who you play as for pretty much the whole game, which I'll talk about later, as the whole goal of the story is for him to save and rescue Ciri, who isn't his actual daughter but does see her as that. She is actually his adoptive daughter as she's being tracked down by the Wild Hunt, hence the name of the game. They're a group who are trying to hunt down Ciri as she has elder blood from her heritage, which is special because it grants her access to high powered magic that she uses. Therefore, because their world is basically falling apart and dying pretty much, they are targeting people like her. Obviously this is the main goal, but like most games, many different situations get in the way, which I won't say much more about. Because of this, you meet many different characters who play very important roles in the game that all provide meaning and have their own story, which you learn about that can be very purposeful, with some that have a lot of emotional depth to make you attached not only to Geralt but them as well. Therefore, although a direct mission is there, the many different branches of story is what makes the narrative so richly detailed, which I always love in story games. And The Witcher 3 does this perfectly, with it not becoming too confusing or convoluted to the player. This is all combined with the already alive game world as already talked about, so it's then stretched even further when you learn about these characters personally and the main quest you get set. The stories and the development in these characters is of course shown in Geralt as well, who of course contributes a huge amount to the story. Now his character at first hand may give off a very unexpressive tone and persona, but as you progress through the game, this couldn't be further from the truth. Yes, Geralt may speak in a very serious tone, but this is what makes you notice those many moments of emotion and relatability in his character. And a lot of this is down to not only his family like Ciri, but even the more minor characters who you meet in side quests. This is because the character of Geralt truly cares about others, even though it's not obviously known straight away. It becomes even more prominent throughout. His determination for this goal of saving Ciri only grows bigger, and he truly wants to work towards it all because he wants to care and defend her. Another unique aspect of The Witcher 3 is of course the combat, and it's mainly down to its style. It could be seen as somewhat simple to some players in terms of the moves you can do and how much variety you can implement into your fights. This could be slightly true, but the overall movement and the style Geralt fights in is all kind of done for you, and no matter how simple you like to fight, even if that's just one control, such as the light attack, the way Geralt flips and spins and turns with so much force, it makes the combat so satisfying and brutal. Of course, if you're somebody who wants a really detailed and experimental fighting system with many different controls to switch up your style, this could be seen as limited, as it's just light and heavy attacks with parry and roll, though it becomes way more advanced in the crafting system, from the collection of various herbs, animal parts and items, as well as the magic you can implement. You can craft an abundance of different potions and oils, which I will talk more about, that can be used along the sword controls as well to then acquire more thinking and timing in fights. Therefore you can upgrade and add a lot more to your combat if that's your playstyle. Otherwise, as mentioned, even the simplest of controls and attacks are always seen as so unique and smooth because of how they animated Geralt's character and the way he moves when you fight, which was definitely one of my favourite parts of the game, which is quite an important feature as that is how you play the game and is the majority of the gameplay, due to how many missions involve it and just the random encounters of creatures and monsters trying to stop you as you traverse through the world. And the combat still doesn't become too convoluted and confusing. Now, speaking more on the potion and oil system to help with not only attacking but defense as well. The oils are added to your swords to upgrade them and make them more powerful to give you much more of an advantage against stronger enemies you meet. All the different enemy types you meet can be researched on, and information is always given to you about what they are like as well as what they are vulnerable to, which I thought was a great feature that of course will help a lot when you encounter them, and that specific enemy type again. Whether that be the different oils that are effective or spells, there's a handful of spells to choose from and use in combat. All of this combined brings a lot of customization to a, at first glance, a limited combat system in terms of fighting controls, so it never becomes boring or repetitive, which is always key, especially in such a vast game like this. After many hours could easily become exhausting to the player due to the limited combat in the game, but you can easily switch and alter your playstyle to the way you want, and the skill points you to unlock as well go towards acquiring and choosing certain skills you want to use, as there's many more in the game, but you'll have to just decide which ones you want to use and equip. So it then becomes your very own loadout that is very precise. Now, as I mentioned earlier, it isn't always Geralt you play as, though of course that is for the majority. There's small moments where you play as Ciri, whose combat is very different from Geralt. I say very, it's basically because she has of course the special blood, which actually allows her to implement various magic and powerful moves, such as jolting forward very fast to quickly move out the way of the various enemies. The enemy types always have not only their own unique appearance, variations in size and so much detail put into them, but also in the way they attack. Therefore this adds on to the loadouts and you can always interchange them and the way you approach all of them. Now, in terms of gameplay outside of combat and mainly traversing through the game, I would say that the riding on your mount is not the smoothest of features, with it becoming slightly clunky here and there when you traverse through more dense areas with trees, hills, rocks, fences, etc. Compared to other video games with mounts, I'm sure the smoothness can be improved slightly, especially with how much travelling you actually do with your horse. In terms of performance, I didn't notice any issues from what I can remember, which is usually always a slight issue in the next gen updates or just older games in general. Bearing in mind how huge the game is, it ran fantastic with very little to no bugs. Apart from that, in terms of gameplay, I thought they did a great job with no huge complaints. Comment down below if there's anything that you think could be improved with either combat or simply traversing through the game. Just overall, there's very few complaints and bad aspects of the game. Of course, this is usually rare in video games, but I and many others would say that The Witcher 3 is an incredible and a close to perfect game. So I think this alone of course answers the question in the title and where I wrap up this video. Yes, The Witcher 3 is definitely worth playing in not only 2023, but I'm confident people will always keep recommending this game years on. Like many big open world RPGs, if they create the game right, then it's always an incredible experience that I believe people will enjoy even more if you slowly progress through the game and not rush through it, even though it can be that addicting. Just exploring the world, meeting many characters, fighting the array of different creatures, collecting various items as you play through. The Witcher 3 will always be worth checking out for any player who enjoys story games. I hope you did enjoy this video of me reviewing The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt in 2023. I know the answer may be slightly obvious, but I'm sure many people not only want to know but just gather an insight of the game and what to expect. So if you found it helpful, then I really appreciate it if you hit that like button down below, and if you like these types of videos and video game reviews and commentaries, then maybe even considering subscribing to the channel to watch more. I've talked about many different story games with a playlist or video at the end of this video if you'd like to check that out, and also in the description down below. Thank you all for watching until the end, and bye bye.